Okay, let's leave Chinua Achebe's memoir aside now. What's the way forward?
Had enough?
Well, I mean,
Okay,
you've said quite a
sure.
lot. But let's move forward now because of time. What's the way forward for Nigeria? A lot of people have said Nigeria reconciliation didn't really integrate the Igbos. Now, what's your stand on this? Were the Igbos fully integrated? Achebe has made that stand that Igbos were not fully integrated as well in his
I've
memoir.
told you that Achebe is living in a time warp. His mind is Biafra, Biafra, until the day he
Is
goes,
there
it'll
truth to the
Biafra. There's
statement?
absolutely no truth in that. And it's unfair to the Nigerian people for anybody to suggest that. Let me tell you. Not only if, okay, let me put it to you like this. If General Murtala Mohammed, who was one of the greatest heads of state that Nigeria ever had, even though he was only there for 6 months, if he had been the head of state and not General Yakubu Gawan, I don't want to be unkind and I don't want to misrepresent anybody, but there's a distinct possibility that millions and millions of Igbos may not have survived the war because he was a radical and he believed in crushing the enemy, as most soldiers do. He didn't, this business of reconciliation after the war, no victor, no vanquished, people like Murtala Mohammed and a good deal of the Nigerian military were against it. That what are you talking about? These people killed our people. In a war, people suffer, and there's somebody is defeated and you crush him. That was a very strong school of thought. Epitomized by people like Murtala Mohammed. I'd say to a certain extent, Obasanjo, and I hope I'm not getting myself into trouble here with my Oga, but that was the tendency. Those guys were real soldiers. They didn't understand this humane position that people like Awolowo, particularly, and Gawan took. That how can you be talking about full intelligence? Well, these people have been defeated, But nevertheless, Gawan was in power for 9 years, and he did everything he could, okay, to integrate them. And what happened in the Southwest? These people that Achebe says hates Igbos and starved Igbos, they came back. There was no abandoned property. They got their properties back. They got their savings back. They got everything that they ever wanted back. There was the issue of the change of currency during the war. I should have mentioned that earlier. That happened simply because Nigerian currency was being used in Biafra to buy arms. The currency had to be changed. There was the issue of the £20. That was not an Awolowo initiative. It was a committee by the central bank that was set up and made that proposal because nobody could verify all the claims that were being made. But quite apart from that, Igbos were welcomed home to the Southwest. They got their properties. They got more or less their jobs back. As a matter of fact, there was even a policy to try to put as many Igbos in key jobs as possible immediately after the Civil War. 10 years after the Civil War, you had an Igbo vice president in this country, Alex Ekweme. 10 years. Check world history, and I'm a historian, I know what I'm talking about. It has never happened before anywhere else in the world, that you will have an armed conflict where, hundreds of thousands, millions of people died, and the rebel side that was defeated produces a vice president 10 years later, okay, for the whole country. It's never happened anywhere before in the world. Nigeria was gracious enough to do that. After that, the Igbos came in, business, they've done well, they have assimilated themselves to Nigerian society. In the Southwest where we live, where the Yorubas reside in this country, Igbos have probably more property, more land, more business, more homes than any other ethnic group apart from the Yorubas themselves. They've literally taken over Lagos.
But is this as a result of any policy by Nigeria?
This is as a result of the fact the Nigerian government, the Nigerian people, particularly the Yoruba people, were very gracious after the war that, listen, no victor, no vanquished. We fought, we were brothers and sisters, we've made up, let them come back. It doesn't often happen after a civil war. Civil wars are the most brutal type of wars. They go on for generations after the cessation of hostilities. Not in Nigeria, we're very different. They came in droves, and we were happy to have them. And by 1999, look at the situation. A beautiful thing happened, By 1999, you had the first, some people had sworn that Igbos would never take key positions in the Nigerian military again. Okay, they're rebels. 1999, you had a Yoruba president who came in by the name of President Olusegun Obasanjo. He appointed the first Igbo GOC ever since the Civil War took place in the Nigerian Army. General Obiako is the man, a wonderful officer. Since then, the door was open for Igbo officers to rise up to high positions. Today, you have an Igbo chief of army staff. And they're talking about integration. Where is it? An Igbo foreign minister. An Igbo foreign minister, an Igbo minister of finance, under Obasanjo, Igbo foreign minister, Igbo minister of finance, Igbo minister of education, Obi Ezekwesili, Okonjo-Iweala, Andy Uba in the villa, literally running the whole country and running the government. I could go on and on. So many of them. Charles Soludo, Igbo governor of Central Bank in 1999 or after 1999. The Igbos were fully integrated. In the Obasanjo government, which I served in, all right, I can certainly tell you from 2003 to 2007, the Igbos were exceptionally strong within that government, to the extent that Yorubas were even saying, is Obasanjo a pure Yoruba man, that he's given so much to the Igbos, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is what some people say. I don't subscribe to that view. I know he's a Yoruba man, but I'm just saying this is what people were saying. So how can anybody in his right mind say that the Igbos were not fully integrated? Look at the rise of Igbo women today in Nigerian politics. And look at Dora Akuli. Just look at the rise of them. I wrote an article about a year ago about Igbo women. A lot of my Yoruba women and non-Igbo women in Nigeria were very unhappy about it. And I spoke about the sheer dynamism of Igbo women, the way in which they managed to excel. And it all happened only since 1999. They are everywhere, doing so well now. How can anybody say they haven't been fully integrated in Nigeria? The Igbos have not only been fully integrated, they have done exceptionally well in this country. And I'm very proud of them, I might add. So for anybody to come at this point in time to now say the Yorubas, who out of every single ethnic group in this country, I'm telling you, were the most accommodating and charitable to the Igbos before, during, and after the Civil War, to say we are responsible for the starvation of the Igbo children is a very, very unkind cut. You know, like Julius Caesar said, a tu brute, this is the unkindest cut of all. Then Caesar falls. It's very, very painful to hear such a thing. Very painful coming from him.
What's the way forward now? This is 2012. This war was fought by our fathers, but we seem to be drawn back to this whole controversy, this whole ethnic rivalry or distrust or mistrust between ethnic groups. What should we be doing?
The first thing we need to do, in my view, is to try to ensure that our children and our people are educated properly in terms of their own history. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? If you don't learn from your history, if you don't learn the mistakes of history, you will repeat them. If you don't know your history, you're not going anywhere. Appreciate the fact that things are just, not the way they're supposed to be. Appreciate the fact that we have fundamental differences. Appreciate the fact that not all is well in this country. Acknowledge the fact that we have various nationalities, not tribes, nationalities, large nationalities in this country, and we need to renegotiate the terms of our country. Interestingly, the questions that the Biafrans put and that Ojukwu put in 1966-67 about Nigerian nationhood are still the questions that are relevant today. And in fairness to them, I think that history has shown that they had a very, very reasonable position that they took at the time. And maybe if some of us had listened to them a little bit, we wouldn't be in the mess that we are today. The truth is that if you ask me what the way forward is, I believe that we need to either go our separate ways as a country and start all over again, as has happened in India, and as has happened in the Sudan, and as has happened in a number of other countries that were brought together as artificial states. That's one. A lot of people don't like that suggestion, but I'm just saying that's one way. Another way is for us to renegotiate the terms of this nation through the auspices of a sovereign national conference, devolve power from the center, as is happening even in the United Kingdom itself today, to the various regions, and allow the people from those regions to now begin to achieve their full potentials by developing at their own pace. Allow for at least 50, 60, 70% resource control, that is derivation, with the principle of revenue allocation. Fiscal federalism, your own state police, your own regional armies, so on and so forth. Let power be devolved from the center, and let us go back to the way we were, maybe in the early 60s, and start all over again. If you want to keep Nigeria as one nation, I believe that's the only way you can do it. You know, there's a provision in the Ethiopian constitution which allows every nationality within that country to opt out of the federation if they want to. It's there, it's constitutional. They put it in there. It's only ever been used once when Eritrea decided to go its separate way, and they allowed them to go. They had a war later, but that was over land, that was over territory, it wasn't over the right of self-determination. And I believe that that is something we need to have in our country, and that is something that we need to think about very, very seriously. If you want Nigeria to continue as one nation, you must have a renegotiation of terms, devolution of power, autonomy, establishment of true federalism, the confirmation of a secular state, the secularity of the state. So you get rid of all this Boko Haram and Sharia and all the rest of it, okay? And so on and so forth. If we can do that, then there may well be hope. And most importantly, start producing and insisting on leaders that are literate, leaders that are historically sound, leaders that understand the importance of good governance, not people that take pride in saying that they never went to school, or people that never went to school at all. I mean, you know, education has a place, you know, and I think it's important that we encourage such people, educated people, and people that are quite well bred, you know, to take positions of power in this country and not drive them away, and so on and so forth, and say no, we don't want such people. So that's what I think the way forward is.
Now I'm going to ask you a very a very difficult question, if I may say. A lot of your critics criticize things that you say, especially when it has to do with Awolowo, because of Awolowo's relationship with your father. Does that have any bearing in anything that you have said or anything that you have written about Awolowo?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question, because you're absolutely right. People always raise this issue. Let me start by saying I am Femi Fani Kayode, not Remi Fani Kayode. And you know, I was quite well educated, and my education allows me to disagree with even the person that brought me into this world from time to time. Not to say I disagreed with him on this issue, but there was a division in Yoruba politics. I'm well aware of that, and I know the history inside out. But let me go back a bit. My father was with Awolowo he was in Action Group, leader of the Action Group Youth Wing from 1949. And he stayed as leader of the Action Group Youth Wing right up until 1958. He represented Ile-Ife, where I come from 1953 till 1958 on the Action Group platform in the Federal House of Parliament. And he was one of the most active, one of the most brilliant, and one of the most loyal people to Chief Awolowo and to the Action Group, okay? So he was there for all those years, okay? There was a fallout in 1959. They went their separate ways. My father did not leave politics. He went to another election. He became leader of the NCNC. People say we're anti-Igbo. My father was the leader of the NCNC in the Western House of Assembly by 1959. He led the opposition against Awolowo, and that's the time you're talking about. They were on different political sides. And of course, when the schism came within the Action Group, Akitola left Action Group, joined my father, and they formed the NNDP together. And the rest is history. They fought Awolowo. There's no question about that. There was a deep and bitter divide within Yoruba land in the early 60s. And I'll tell you what, Yoruba land was more or less 50-50 at the time. Through the 50s, NCSC was even stronger than Action Group. And Zik almost became premier of the West. So when anybody tells you we're anti-Igbo, forget it. History doesn't bear that out. Now let me get back to the point. Unfortunately, what happened was that by January 15th, 1966, like I said, there was the Igbo coup. They came for my father. They took him away. I was there. I was 6 years old. I witnessed the whole thing. Then I went to Akitola's house. Unfortunately, Akitola fought back. He wounded 2 of the Igbo soldiers. And then they murdered Akitola in front of everybody and moved on. What that meant was this. The leadership of the anti-Awolowo group in the West, you know, had only one man left as its leader. That was my father. He now took the leadership, okay? And what happened? By 1967, when Awolowo was freed from prison by Gawan, not by Ojukwu, as some people are saying, it was the federal government that controlled prisons. It was the federal government that released Awolowo. He came back. And there was a famous meeting that was called on May the 1st, 1967, at the Western Hall Agodi in Ibadan. This is a very important date and a very important venue, and it's something that Nigerians don't know enough about, okay? When that meeting took place, all the Yoruba leaders from both the NNDP side and the Action Group side, those are the 2 factions in Yoruba land, came together. And it was called by a man called General Adeyinka Adebayo. He's still alive. He was military administrator of the Western region at the time. And the issue was this, that we have a civil war now. a civil war is about to come, and we need to unite, all of us as Yoruba people, as one. Let's forget the divisions of the past. Everybody was there. Anybody was there, including my dad. And what happened at that meeting? After a lot of arguments and after a lot of discussion and analysis, they all agreed to be one. And it was at that meeting, a lot of people don't know this, that Awolowo was declared or pronounced by popular acclamation of the leaders there as leader of the Yorubas. And you know what? It was an NNDP person, one of my own father's men, that proposed that. And you know what else happened at that meeting? At that same meeting, my father, who was the leader of the other side, was appointed as deputy leader of the Yorubas. So from May 1st, 1967 onwards, Awolowo and my dad were leader of the Yorubas, deputy leader of the Yorubas, and they were one. And there was a war effort, and we were fighting against the Biafrans. It was at that same meeting, after the meeting took place, that Awolowo made that famous statement. And he made an appeal to the federal government that, look, if the Igbos are not carried, I can't remember the words verbatim, but it's in his book, that the Igbos needed, the Biafrans, well, they weren't Biafrans inside, the Igbos needed to be spoken to, they needed to be kept within the federation, that whatever it is they wanted, that the federal government should do its very best to allow them to have it, so that we can keep Nigeria one. Because if they go, if they are forced out and they're not treated fairly, that the Yoruba nation would have no choice but to also leave the federation. He made that famous statement. Now, what happened after that? You can, it may not have worked out like that. I think probably the thinking was that, okay, I gather that after that famous statement, he went to Enugu to see Ojukwu and spoke to him. Went into enemy territory, risked his life and said, listen, you've got to be able to accept, the Aburi Declaration, they gave him almost 90% of what he asked for. And he told him, look, accept this and let's leave it. Let's all remain together. You've got what you want. You've got a virtual confederation. Ojukwu said no. Awolowo now came back. And it was because Ojukwu was so unreasonable at that point that he decided to stay with not take the Yorubas out of the federation. But the point I'm making is this. We were all one from that point onwards. So the divisions and the acrimony and the fighting and the killings and the terrible events that took place from 1964 after the Western regional elections that led to violence in the West and so on and so forth, and the acrimony between the two groups, as far as I'm concerned, ended in 1967.
So there was no bad blood between?
There was a lot of bad blood at the time, during the killings, during the fighting, particularly from 1959, when my dad left the action group. He was treated very badly by them, but where they messed him up in Ife, he won the very same seat the following year for NCNC and came back. There was a lot of bad blood.
So personally, do you have any grudge?
Well, how could I possibly have any grudge when I've just told you that Awolowo was leader of the Yorubas by popular acclamation, proclaimed so by somebody that was on my dad's side. He moved the motion. And my dad was deputy. So from that point, we were together.
Was that a seat that your father was vying for?
It wasn't a question of vying for the seat. It was a question of necessity. They were forced together because there was a war and we needed to be one. And we were one from that point on. After that happened and politics, Gawan, after the war was over and Gawan did not release, give power back to the civilians, Awolowo left the government, if you remember. And from that point, he started planning his comeback to be president of the country. Unfortunately, and I think this is where they all made a mistake, by 1979, when politics started again, instead of them all sticking together, you still had a situation where people like my dad and so on and so forth, went back to the MPN and places like that, and Awolowo was in UPN. If they had continued together as they did during the Civil War, and the post-war years, perhaps our history would have been very, very different, But that was their call.
So no grudges? No
grudges at all. As a Yoruba man, I cannot have grudges and I cannot look down on anybody, but I'm very, very conversant with my history, and I'm very conversant with the fact that, that we must make our own choices. I will defend Awolowo, or indeed anybody that has been wrongly criticized by people that really don't know any better and that should know better, like Achebe.